After a glamorous makeover, Shelby Thornburg was chasing her dream to be a model, never realizing it may have made her the perfect prey for a predator. Now, Shelby is dead. Her last headshot, a crime scene photo. And her grieving sister Christina Scott wants answers. After Shelby's vicious murder, Christina heads to Houston searching for clues in her sister's death. What she finds is a bloody mess.
In Houston, Texas, the stillness of the night was shattered by a call to emergency services. A tense male voice informed the dispatcher that he had discovered the body of a young woman in an apartment. Though he remained calm, the strain in his tone was undeniable. Whoever was on the line had witnessed something unforgettable. The apartment was unexpectedly tidy, with a faint scent of perfume lingering in the air, mingling with the unmistakable metallic tang of blood. On the couch lay a woman, face down, surrounded by a dark stain that had already seeped into the fabric. A deep wound on her neck made survival impossible. When officers arrived, they found no signs of forced entry or struggle. Nothing suggested chaos or impulsiveness. This was no robbery. The perpetrator had left behind no obvious traces, suggesting a calculated approach. One officer crouched beside the body, attempting to estimate the time of death. While the exact moment remained uncertain, one thing was clear. The suspect had left only hours earlier, yet there was no weapon, no clear sign of what had been used in the attack. The most pressing question: who was the last person to step through that door? Welcome back to my channel. Do support my channel by clicking on the subscribe button and remember to turn on the notification bell for more interesting stories. Shelby Thornburg was born on August 18, 1995, in the small town of Decatur, Wise County. Her childhood was far from stable. Her parents struggled to provide a safe home for her and her sister. Their father, Robert Thornburg, had a history of criminal behavior and was in and out of prison. Though the details of his offenses remained unclear, his absence made little difference in his daughters' lives. He had never taken an interest in them, even when he wasn't behind bars. Their mother, Leslie Thornburg, was an even greater challenge. She battled addiction and, over the years, lost more and more control over her life. When her daughters were young, she frequently left them alone for hours at a time. Neighbors often heard their cries, but no one was there to comfort them. They learned to fend for themselves, searching for food wherever they could, and their living conditions were far from safe. Eventually, Leslie became incapable of even the most basic parental responsibilities. Multiple reports to Child Protective Services finally led to intervention. After an assessment, social workers deemed Leslie unfit to care for her daughters, and the sisters were placed in foster care. Their future was supposed to improve, but it didn't. They were shuffled between homes, sometimes together, often apart. While some foster families genuinely tried to support them, others were indifferent. At least one placement involved mistreatment, though the details were never publicly disclosed. Through it all, Christina, the older sister, remained Shelby's protector. Though she couldn't change the decisions made by the adults in their lives, she did everything possible to shield her younger sister from the worst of it. This continued until their father was unexpectedly released from prison and regained custody of them under unclear circumstances. However, his return brought no stability. He was far from the parent they needed, and his presence only added to their struggles. Much about this period remains unknown, but it became yet another painful chapter in their lives. When Christina turned 18, she took Shelby in. She found a job, rented an apartment, and assumed the role of caretaker. Despite her efforts, Shelby still carried the weight of her childhood trauma. She struggled to cope with her past, but Christina was always there, the one person she could trust. From a young age, Shelby dreamed of becoming a model. She imagined herself in photo shoots, walking runways, and gracing fashion magazine covers. This vision gave her hope that she could escape her past, but significant challenges stood in her way. As a teenager, Shelby gained weight rapidly, a result of both genetics and emotional struggles. Stress, instability, and a lack of support led to an unhealthy relationship with food. She often ate for comfort, only to feel ashamed later. When Christina took her in, it became clear that Shelby needed help. She was self-conscious, avoided cameras, and rarely went out. Her dream of modeling seemed impossible. Seeing her sister's pain, Christina stepped in. She provided emotional support and found a professional to help Shelby work through her struggles. Therapy made a difference. Over time, Shelby shifted her mindset, improved her diet, and became more active. The changes were noticeable. She gradually lost weight. However, the rapid transformation came with new insecurities. Despite the progress, she still struggled with self-confidence. Even so, Shelby refused to give up on her dream. Modeling wasn't just a fantasy, it was a goal she was determined to achieve. After graduating high school, she faced a major decision. College didn't interest her. She wanted to work, but opportunities in her small hometown were limited. Major modeling agencies were based in big cities. That's when she made her choice. She would move to Houston. Christina didn't try to dissuade her. She understood that her sister was searching for a new life. To ease the transition, she helped Shelby find a place to live. Shelby left, filled with excitement, hoping for new opportunities. Reality turned out to be much harsher than Shelby had imagined. Breaking into the modeling industry was far more difficult than she anticipated. Without connections or experience, her applications went unnoticed. Financial stress mounted. Rent had to be paid, and her savings wouldn't last forever. Then, she met Marcus Johnson. Marcus was a wealthy entrepreneur, well-connected and influential. They met through mutual acquaintances, and he quickly took an interest in her. He promised stability, housing, and financial support. To friends and family, Shelby referred to him as her boyfriend. She spoke warmly of him, avoiding details about their relationship. In truth, their relationship had little to do with love. Marcus operated an exclusive escort network, offering young women financial security, luxury apartments, and protection. At first, Shelby hesitated. But as financial pressures grew, the temptation of easy money became harder to resist. Eventually, she agreed. Thanks to Marcus, Shelby moved into a high-end apartment. Her income increased, and luxuries that once seemed out of reach became her new reality. But with the money came risks. Some clients were dangerous. Shelby started distancing herself from Christina, avoiding conversations about work and turning down invitations to visit. Christina sensed something was wrong. Her suspicions were confirmed when she noticed inconsistencies in Shelby's stories and changes in her behavior. When she confronted her, Shelby admitted the truth. What followed was their first serious argument. Christina pleaded with her to walk away to find another path, but Shelby refused. She insisted she was in control. Yet, in reality, that control had long slipped away. Over time, Shelby became trapped. The lifestyle she once saw as an escape became a cage. November 4th, 2015, started like any other day for Shelby. That evening, she was expecting a client, someone who had reached out in advance to arrange a meeting. At 8:30 p.m., security cameras captured a man entering her building. He kept his head down, deliberately avoiding the cameras. He sat in the lobby for a moment before heading up to her apartment. At 8:40 p.m., Shelby sent Marcus a message confirming the meeting had begun. It was standard procedure. After that, all contact with her stopped. At 8:57 p.m., the same man was seen leaving the building. His pace was steady, his hands in his pockets. He disappeared into the night. Marcus, unable to reach Shelby, grew concerned. At 9:50 p.m., he went to her apartment. Using his key, he let himself in. The overwhelming silence was the first thing he noticed. The lights were on, but something felt wrong. Then he saw her, lying face down on the couch. Blood had soaked into the fabric. Her clothes had been neatly set aside. A deep wound on her neck left no doubt. She was gone. Marcus wasted no time. He grabbed his phone and called the police. His voice was tense, but steady, as he provided the exact address and described what he had discovered. Within minutes, officers arrived at the scene. As they examined the apartment, they quickly noticed something unusual. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle. Everything suggested that the suspect had entered and left without leaving a trace. Investigators also noted the absence of a weapon and the lack of any fingerprints from an unidentified individual. The medical examiner later determined that the time of death was approximately an hour before the police arrived, coinciding with the moment an unknown man was seen leaving the building. The case raised more questions than answers. Who was he? What was his motive? And how had he managed to avoid leaving any evidence? The investigation had only just begun, and Marcus was immediately considered a person of interest. He was the one who had discovered the body, had access to the apartment, and was familiar with Shelby's schedule. Officers examined his clothing for any trace evidence and reviewed his phone records, confirming that he had been trying to contact Shelby in the hour leading up to the discovery. Marcus fully cooperated, handing over his messages with her. The last message she sent at 8:40 p.m. confirmed that her meeting was going as planned. Detectives checked his alibi. He had been elsewhere at the time of the crime, and security footage confirmed it. Although released from suspicion, he remained under observation as the case progressed. Investigators then turned to the building's surveillance footage. One individual immediately stood out: a man who entered the lobby at 8:34 p.m., avoiding eye contact with anyone. He briefly sat in the waiting area before taking the elevator to Shelby's floor. Exactly 23 minutes later, at 8:57 p.m., he exited the building. As detectives analyzed the footage, they noticed something odd. His clothes remained unchanged. His movements were steady and deliberate, but he never removed his left hand from his pocket. The surveillance cameras failed to capture a clear view of his face. He kept his head down and wore sunglasses despite the fact that the sun had set hours earlier. It was unclear whether he was confident the cameras wouldn't capture his identity, or if he knew that leaving behind evidence wouldn't be a concern, even if someone later identified him. Shelby's apartment was surprisingly devoid of forensic evidence. Even the most meticulously planned crimes tend to leave behind microscopic traces, fingerprints, skin cells, hair. But here, there was almost nothing. The only biological trace found by forensic specialists was too small for a full analysis. This suggested one of two things. Either the suspect had worn gloves or had carefully wiped down everything afterward, ensuring no evidence remained. No fingerprints, no DNA, not even a single footprint. The methodical nature of the crime indicated a calculated approach. With no immediate leads, the investigation stalled. The only certainty was that the last person to enter Shelby's apartment was the same person who left, but his identity remained unknown. Tracing phone records became a key focus of the case. Investigators discovered that the number used to send Shelby her last message wasn't registered to a real person. It was a prepaid burner phone, purchased anonymously and untraceable. This suggested one thing: the owner had no intention of leaving a digital footprint. Any attempts to track calls or link the phone to another device led nowhere. After the crime, the number was never used again, and the SIM card was likely destroyed. This level of caution pointed to careful planning and an awareness of how to evade detection. Determined to uncover more, detectives examined the phone's messaging history. What they found was unsettling. In the 2 weeks before Shelby's death, the same number had sent messages to at least 10 other women listed on an escort service website. These women weren't chosen at random. They all shared a striking resemblance to Shelby: a similar age range, blonde hair, and a specific body type. The suspect had been targeting a particular profile: Police reached out to these women to determine if any of them had met with the suspect. While most didn't recall much or had ignored the messages, a few provided chilling insights. One woman reported that the man insisted on meeting at a private apartment rather than a hotel. Another noted that he refused to take phone calls, only communicating through text. A third woman found it strange that he never discussed payment. He seemed uninterested in the financial aspect. These details painted a clear picture. This individual was deliberately searching for a specific type of woman, reaching out to multiple individuals before ultimately choosing one. This meant Shelby's death wasn't random. She had been watched, followed, and deliberately selected. Investigators then asked a crucial question. Was this his first crime? His careful planning suggested experience or, at the very least, extensive research into avoiding capture. Detectives reviewed other missing persons cases and unsolved crimes in the area, but found no obvious connections. However, that didn't mean they didn't exist. Perhaps his previous victims didn't fit the same profile, or maybe he had operated in different cities. This man was like a ghost. He arrived, took a life, and vanished, leaving behind only one clue: his fixation on a certain type of woman. Once again, the investigation hit a dead end. Then, a new theory emerged. What if this wasn't a random act of violence, but a targeted elimination? Shelby was involved in an industry linked to illegal activity, and it was possible she had information that posed a threat to someone in her circle. Christina, her sister, believed this was the case. Shelby had talked about leaving the business and starting fresh, a decision that in that world often came with consequences. If she had been planning to cut ties, she could have been seen as a liability. In cases like this, threats and blackmail are common tactics, and if those don't work, more drastic measures are taken. Christina was convinced her sister had been silenced. A month before her death, Shelby had discussed leaving the industry and making plans to move. There was also the possibility that she had been cooperating with law enforcement or had hinted to someone that she knew something valuable. The fact that no valuables were taken and that there were no signs of a struggle only reinforced this theory. Had this been a random act, the scene would have looked different. But everything about it was precise, calculated, and cold, suggesting the work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Both theories were plausible, but there wasn't enough evidence to confirm either. The case remained open, but progress was slow. As time passed, it became increasingly difficult to move forward. Shelby Thornburg's death remained unsolved. Months turned into years, yet law enforcement never identified the suspect. Surveillance footage captured the man who was likely the last person to see her alive, but his identity was never uncovered. If he was a repeat offender, it meant he could still be out there, searching for new victims. Investigators reviewed similar cases, but no direct matches were found. It was possible that he had changed locations, altered his methods, or even stopped altogether. But if this had been a targeted killing, then whoever orchestrated it had managed to stay in the shadows. Neither law enforcement nor Shelby's family had a clear suspect, and those who might have known something refused to speak. In that case, her death wasn't random. It had been carefully planned. Christina never stopped fighting for justice. She persistently contacted the police, pushed for further investigation, and proposed new theories. But without physical evidence, willing witnesses, or cooperation from Shelby's former associates, the case remained at a standstill. Officially, it was still an open investigation. In reality, it had gone cold. Shelby's family was left waiting for answers, but with each passing year, the hope of finding them faded. Shelby's case remains unsolved. Whoever targeted her had planned every detail. But one thing was clear. This wasn't random. Someone had been watching her. Someone had chosen her.